Today, we're going to talk about something that's absolutely fundamental to being human, but at the same time, it's a total mystery. Our memory. It literally shapes who we are, right? Everything we know, how we see the world. But how does this amazing, powerful, and let's be honest, surprisingly flaky system actually work? So let's just start with the raw power of the thing. Some researchers think the human brain has a storage capacity of around 1 petabyte. Now, what does that even mean? Well, that's a million gigabytes. It's like having 4.7 billion books stored in your head. It is an absolute supercomputer. So if that's true, exactly, we've all been there. You have this incredible biological machine, and yet you can't remember that one thing you needed from the kitchen. And that is the big puzzle we're going to try and solve today. That gap between our brain's massive potential and our very, very human reality of forgetting things. Okay, so to figure out why we forget, we've got to start at the beginning. We need to understand how a memory is born in the first place. And it's not just one quick event, it's actually this really fascinating multi-step process. Most psychologists agree on this basic three-stage model. So first you have encoding. That's the moment it all begins when your brain first takes in a piece of information. Then you've got storage, which is all about, holding on to that information over time. And finally, there's retrieval, which is you actually pulling that memory out when you need it. And here's the kicker. If any one of those steps fails, poof, the memory's gone. Let's zoom in on that very first step. Encoding, because this is so important. There's this idea called the levels of processing theory, and it basically says that not all encoding is the same. The depth, how deeply you think about something, is the real key to making a memory that actually sticks around. So what's the difference, right? Well, shallow processing is pretty superficial. It's like just noticing if the word brain is written in capital letters. You're not really thinking about it. But deep processing is all about meaning. When you have to think about whether the word brain fits into that sentence, you're connecting it to all this other stuff you already know. That is the kind of encoding that builds really strong, lasting memories. So that's the process. But where in the brain is this all happening? Well, deep inside your temporal lobes, there's this little seahorse-shaped structure. It's called the hippocampus, and you can think of it as your brain's memory manager. Now, it's not where memories live forever, but it is absolutely crucial for forming new explicit memories, like, say, what you ate for dinner last night. And this is where it gets really, really cool. Down at the level of your brain cells. Every single time you make a memory or even just remember one, the physical connections between your neurons get stronger. It's a process called long-term potentiation, or LTP. A great way to think about it is like trying to make a path in a forest. The first time you go, it's hard work, but the more you walk that same path, the clearer and easier it gets to travel. That's LTP. And fun fact, this whole path-building process gets supercharged while you sleep. Okay, so we've seen how a memory gets carefully built and reinforced. Now let's look at the flip side. Why, after all that work, do our memories just seem to, vanish into thin air? Way back in the 1880s, this German psychologist, Hermann Ebbinghaus, did something pretty revolutionary. He actually decided to measure the act of forgetting scientifically. He made himself memorize all these lists of nonsense syllables, and then he just meticulously tracked how quickly he forgot them. What he created is what we now call the forgetting curve. And what he found was, honestly, it was kind of shocking. Just look at this chart. The drop-off is incredibly fast and steep. Ebbinghaus found that after only 20 minutes, he could only remember about 60% of what he just learned. A week later, it was down to like 15%. This proves that without some real effort on our part, forgetting isn't just something that happens, it's basically our brain's default mode. So, why? Why does this happen? Well, it usually boils down to one of three main culprits. First, you've got failure to store. This means the information never really got locked into long-term memory to begin with. Think about someone's name you hear once at a loud party. Next is retrieval failure. The memory is actually in there somewhere. You just can't get to it. That is that awful tip-of-your-tongue feeling we all know and hate. And number 3 is interference, which is when other memories are basically getting in the way and blocking the one you're trying to find. And this interference thing actually comes in 2 different flavors. Proactive interference is when your old memories mess with the new ones. That's when your old password keeps popping into your head when you're trying to type your new one. Retroactive interference is the total opposite. New information kicks out the old. Like you finally learn your new phone number and then suddenly you have absolutely no idea what your old one was. Okay, so it seems like our brains are kind of built to forget. But, and this is a big but, The good news is we're not helpless. There are specific research-backed ways to fight back against that forgetting curve and really strengthen those neural pathways. So let's talk about how to hack your own memory. Mnemonic devices are basically just clever memory tricks. They work because they tap into the way our brains already like to organize information. They make complicated or abstract stuff way easier to encode and, more importantly, retrieve. And I bet you've used some of these without even thinking about it. Acronyms are a total classic, right? You just take the first letter of each thing you need to remember and turn it into a new, catchy word. The most famous one has got to be HOMES for remembering the 5 Great Lakes. It's so simple, but it's way, way easier than trying to remember that whole list on its own. All right, next up is chunking. So our short-term memory can only handle about 7 pieces of information at a time. That's why trying to remember a long string of numbers is just impossible. But by breaking it up into smaller, more manageable chunks, like we all do with phone numbers, we can dramatically increase that capacity. See? You're not remembering 10 separate digits, you're just remembering 3 little groups. So we've talked about all these ways to fight forgetting. But for this last point, I want to throw a really different idea at you. Something totally counterintuitive. What if forgetting isn't actually a bug in our system? What if it's a feature? This is a really powerful quote from Dr. Scott Small, who's a top Alzheimer's researcher. And what he's saying is that forgetting might actually be an active process our brain uses to clear out the junk. It gets rid of the useless details so we can see the bigger picture, so we can be more creative and flexible in our thinking. Forgetting isn't just a memory failure, it might actually be brain optimization. And that leaves us with this one last, really fascinating thought to chew on. We spend all this time and energy trying to remember everything. But maybe, just maybe, the real secret to a sharper mind isn't just about holding on to memories, but also about learning to gracefully let the unimportant ones go. Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.